My name is Brian Morse, and this is my presentation for the Young Adult Literacy course. I am currently a freshman teacher of U.S. History 1 in Worcester, Massachusetts. The book that I chose to read was The 5th of March, A Story of the Boston Massacre by Anne Rinaldi. It was noted in the chapter on historical fiction, specifically on page 246. The story it's a story about a young girl who happens to be the housemaid of John and Abigail Adams, who becomes friends with a British boy who is obviously a loyalist during the fight over independence. The main focal point and the main event of the story is obviously the Boston Massacre, and it shows the story from two different points of view. One, the young girl who happens to be living with the Adams family, who are big colonial politicians, and the other side being the British boy. As the book notes, historical fiction can be really helpful to a history class because it gives the opportunity for the reader to make a connection to the past that is based off some emotion, with important characters and characters that you can be drawn to. Students do see some sort of attachment to that they wouldn't normally get, which typically allows the readers to springboard into debates about topics because they're seeing things from multiple perspectives. A history book, a textbook, is typically really one-dimensional and just simply more or less provides facts in terms of events that are going on. Historical fiction takes this to another dimension. It takes it to another level where you can really get in depth on subjects and see these as important times that a textbook really can't simply do. The other aspect it does, that historical fiction does, is it allows for students to raise questions that they may not ordinarily get, simply because they're seeing things from a different viewpoint. Again, a history book textbook is typically written from the point of view of whoever wins. Historical fiction allows the author to kind of jump out of that role. The goal of this lesson is going to be to get students to see an event that is typically in a history book told as very straightforward, factual. This is what happened. It's really unquestioned idea to see multiple perspectives on the event. Typically, the way that a history course in a textbook is set up is that there's really not much debate over the fact that the United States should be free from Britain's control, and that there was really nothing good from it, and that everybody was in favor of it, which is why we celebrate the 4th of July, because everybody was all into it. And the reality of it is that, that there really was a lot of people who, didn't really push for independence, and that it was a long process to get enough support to actually do this. The other aspect of this is, or the other goal rather, is that students are going to learn about what justice and law really is. The soldiers that were charged and brought to trial in the Boston Massacre, there was a big push to really just hang them out to dry, and that nobody should give them the lawyers and the opportunity to go to trial, which is an important aspect. We actually tied this in with the Boston Marathon bombings, and how there was a lot of people who just kind of said, how could anybody defend these people who did this? And in this country, we do get the right and the right to have an attorney. So it was also important to look at it from that aspect. And finally, the idea was for students to gain an appreciation for reading. Typically, in a history class, you wouldn't really do this. There's not a lot of novels that get put in. And this was a book that was not only interesting in terms of the subject matter that we were doing, but it was also a fairly easy read for students. So hopefully that could kind of give them a little bit of a hook. The book does, and the lessons do also tie in with the history standards that Massachusetts has put out, particularly U.S. History 1.1 and 1.5, which deals with the lead up to the American Revolution, as well as the role that Massachusetts took in the Revolution. As far as Common Core standards go, this really deals with the literacy aspects, looking at cause and effect, looking at primary versus secondary sources. So all of these ideas are going to be brought forth in here. Here's the lesson plan that we use that goes through, and basically each particular day has an objective, it has an activity, and it has some sort of assessment. In very, very basic terms, the lesson that I kind of broke it down into 6 parts over multiple days for each part, but there was a pretest and an introduction to the novel. A pretest simply being most students have an idea as to, hey, you know, people should be free, people should be able to make their own choices. Those are the type of leading questions that were asked to try to get them to just look at, you know, the possibility, hopefully in this book, that maybe their assumptions about certain things weren't right. Again, with the law aspect of it, there was in the pretest questions about whether or not if everybody in a community felt as if somebody was guilty, is that should that stand in the way of them getting a fair trial? The second part of the lesson dealt with the lead up to the American Revolution, and we used an activity where there was a question that was posed based off of the readings and the events, where they would be listing all the things that the British did and trying to figure out when would enough be enough for you. I kind of used the analogy during teaching the American Revolution that it's kind of like a soda can that you're shaking up, and it's not going to explode immediately, but eventually there's this build up and build up and build up. And the idea for the second part of the lesson was for students to go through all the events and decide, okay, when's the breaking point for that particular person? Because that was one of the big questions. The third part we did was a comparison of the text between the Boston Massacre in terms of a textbook's approach to it, compared to the Boston Massacre from the story in the novel that we used, because that one was written from a point of view that showed not only the colonial side, but also the British side. The fourth part of the lesson we did was predictions about what would happen to somebody if they had sided with the British soldiers in this, which we really did as a lead-in to the actual Boston Massacre trial. Which got us to lesson 5, which was a trial for the Redcoats, where we did more or less a mock trial where we looked at a lot of the evidence. And the final part was the written portion to this lesson, which was a reflection going back to the pretest they did to see if their ideas on, you know, independence had changed, if their ideas on what justice has changed. The materials that we used was there was the pretest, there was a grievances rating scale where they were going to rate how bad of an action that the king took towards them was. So for things such as the Stamp Act and the Tea Act and writs of assistance and all this, just how bad was what the king was doing. We also used the Venn diagram where we compared the novel and the textbook, and then in the Boston Massacre simulation, they looked at the secondary sources, which would be the novel and the textbook, and they compared that with accounts from eyewitnesses who were colonists, the accounts from the soldiers, and images of the event, including the really famous Paul Revere painting. What they did here was, again, they were trying to see if this was as clear-cut as everybody seems to make it out to be. The hope in the lesson would be that students would see this decision to break away from Great Britain was not an easy choice for a lot of people, and it was something that took a whole lot of time. When you're going to revolt, it is not a type of decision that made at the drop of a hat. They would also see the concept behind justice being there is justice and then there's your personal failings, and the two of them don't necessarily go hand in hand. And finally, that it takes courage to stand up for what's right and just.